Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hacking with Friends. Today, we're going to be going further into hacker operating systems. And to help me today, I have Michael number 2, James. James, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So, we've gone through some pretty intense hacker operating systems that some of them are not really beginner friendly and even require a little bit of explanation just to get people to understand the concepts, like Quebs OS, for example, your favorite. And some of this is really designed towards people who have a specific job they want to do, or they're very, very focused towards privacy and security at kind of the detriment of accessibility and convenience, with the exception, I think, of Manjaro. Now, today we're going to be talking about an operating system that I think a lot of people, especially hackers, really like, enjoy, and use, but don't really talk about very much because there's a little bit of a stigma associated with it. James, what operating system are we going to talk about today?
Good old Ubuntu.
Good old Ubuntu. Your enthusiasm inspires me for this topic. So yes, good old Ubuntu. And why is good old Ubuntu something that a lot of hackers might actually be interested in using as their primary hacker OS?
It's designed around being user-friendly, and it's easy to set up, so easy to get going with, more accessible.
Yeah, the analogy I use with this is people get into Linux and they're just like, all right, I want to make sure everyone knows I'm a hacker, so I'm going to do everything, including checking my email and trying to do like normal stuff with Kali Linux. And that's kind of like driving to the grocery store in an armored personnel carrier. You can do it, but it kind of attracts a lot of attention, and there's a lot of stuff on there that you're really not going to need. On top of that, it might not get the best gas mileage, but I'm kind of stretching this analogy a little bit far. But I mean, overall, like I would say the experience of like installing things in Kali Linux that are not security related is not as fun as it could be. It is not an operating system that is designed for day-to-day use for doing things beyond mostly security stuff. It's very specialized for that. That's why people like it. So if you are looking to do something besides that, then it can get hairy really fast. And there's not very many people trying to do like light gaming on Kali Linux. Like it's just like maybe not the operating system for that. So Ubuntu is a really, really attractive alternative for people who have gotten into hacking. Maybe they've tried out Kali and they're like, hey, I really like Linux, but why does it take this much work to just do something normal? Well, if they want to be able to use Linux, easily install Kali tools, and have like virtually the same process for installing and updating, then they can take a look at Ubuntu, which is much, much, much more designed to be a daily driver with all the conveniences and user design and community that you kind of expect from an operating system that beginners might be using. Now, the stigma here is a lot of people hear that you run Ubuntu and they think that you're a Linux baby. They think that like you've only tried one Linux operating system, it's Ubuntu, and now you think you're a Linux expert, and they're going to run up in your face and tell you all about how they run Arch. But ignore those people because Ubuntu is a perfectly good hacker operating system. And when I talk to some of the smartest hackers I know, about what operating systems they like for hacking and for using on a day-to-day basis, Ubuntu is probably the number one response I get. As an operating system they feel comfortable with, they like the way it's updated, they like the community, it's really easy to try scientific tools or experimental things, or stuff that's just outside the scope of Kali Linux, while also doing their just normal everyday stuff. There's a lot of compatibility built in. And if things are going to be compatible for Linux, they're typically supported by Ubuntu and easy to install. So if developers are going to take the time and energy to make something available for Linux, Ubuntu is usually the safest target. So if you're looking for compatibility on Linux with a lot of software, Ubuntu really takes the cake as probably the best operating system for beginners or people looking to switch over to a daily driver that is very comfortable and familiar for anybody that's worked with Kali Linux, because they both share their root in Debian. Now, James, can you explain a little bit about the way that Linux works and how kind of forks of Linux work? Because we've talked about Arch, we've talked about Kali, we've talked about like all these different types, including like Manjaro, which was a fork or a kind of a flavor of Arch Linux. Can you explain how Ubuntu relates to Kali Linux and like what the common link between them is?
So I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this tons of justice in terms of like a technical explanation, but Ubuntu, Parrot, and Kali are all based off of Debian. So that's their kind of sort of common, I don't know, parent, I guess you could say, operating system. And I'm pretty sure all the base components, like the kernel and everything, is all from Debian. And then they have their own sort of packages on top of that that they use, and maybe the desktop environments that it comes with are different. But at its core, it's Debian. So that's the idea.
Yep. And in general, you'll be like updating packages the same way. You'll be using the same package managers, like all the stuff that you expect to work with Kali Linux will also work on Debian, and then some, because there's other ways to install packages that are very friendly. There's a GUI to install packages. There's lots of stuff that's been made easier by developers who put it in like the Ubuntu store or some of the other ways that you can install a new piece of software, aside from just downloading it and installing it the old-fashioned way. So, yeah, what would you say are some other reasons why people might want to check out Ubuntu if they hadn't considered it before, specifically for hacking?
Specifically for hacking. So, I mean, most Linux operating systems seem to have this these days, but I was impressed that Ubuntu especially had the ability to encrypt your disk built into the install process. So that's nice. And apart from that, lots of people use Ubuntu. So if you're kind of struggling to figure out how to do something, the chances are on Ubuntu, somebody has definitely tried to figure out how to do it, and there may be tools to help you do that sort of stuff. So that's the idea there, that it may be easier than it would be otherwise on another operating system with a smaller user base.
Yeah, definitely. So if you're looking for support because you're trying to do something and you're getting an error, Ubuntu is probably the best Linux operating system for you to like copy and paste the error message into Google and probably get some sort of solution that will work for you without like an hour-long rabbit hole of trying to figure out what's wrong. Other operating systems are just prone to these cascading like problems that just take a really long time to diagnose and solve. And Ubuntu seems to really have their stuff figured out. So the situation we had where like we took like the Black Arch like OVA file and like installed it like exactly as it told us to, and then like couldn't update it because there was some like nebulous error. That should never happen with Ubuntu just because of its target audience. It really should never have that much friction. It's much more kind of going towards people that want it to just work the first time. And, you know, they like Linux, but they don't necessarily want to spend all their time under the hood. It's not fun for them. They like having access to an easy, attractive GUI that makes things just simple to access and straightforward. So I really like how pretty Ubuntu is. Like they put some energy into making sure like the GUI is really, really nice and just is something that people wouldn't make fun of you for running with the GUI. Because like I'm sure some of the other options we've had maybe aren't as sexy as some of the default backgrounds and setups. So yeah, I think that if you're going to be on something every day and you're going to be using it for everything from like maybe a little bit of gaming to schoolwork to, you know, other sorts of things besides just hacking, then this is probably the best compromise for you. Just because somebody has probably already figured out how to run that game that you want to play or like otherwise like set things up to work on Ubuntu. Whereas with the Arch-based operating system, like maybe someone's had the time to do that, but you might have to dig through some forums in order to find it, and it might also take a while.
Yeah, that's a good explanation.
Yeah. So I think it's really funny how much self-importance people attach to operating systems. People in the comments who are trying to be really, really mean about like whatever operating system we've chosen to use in the show. Sometimes I'll be using like a Mac OS computer. Sometimes we'll be using like my Ubuntu laptop. It really like, it's kind of all over the place. But the one thing they all have in common is like, they know what the best operating system is. And the fact that you don't know that pisses them off. So like Ubuntu seems like squarely in the middle of this war. And for some reason, Linux people just love to just talk crap about it. Like, I don't know why, but like Ubuntu is kind of like a frequent target, especially in the hacker community, of like being seen as like a noob. But I'm here to say that like, again, like when I talk to more experienced hackers and they talk about operating systems they love to use, that's kind of the key here. Like OpenBSD might be secure. If you ask them, hey, what's the most secure operating system that you've ever used? They probably say like, oh, OpenBSD. But like, do they want to use that to check their email and like, you know, do normal person stuff, like sign up for college or like whatever? No, they don't, because it sucks. Like it's an effort to set up and use. And most people just want to be able to get their work done if it's not something they're really concerned about, like being super locked down. So there are ways of hardening, hardening Ubuntu to be able to make it more like some of these other more locked down operating systems that we have covered. So it is possible to make Ubuntu more secure. It is possible to be like security focused and use Ubuntu as your primary operating system. And I still think it's really, really funny. People like jumping in the chat or like into the comments, like with their very, very strong opinions about what the best operating system is. That's like super tied to their ego for some reason. So, you know, you can hack with pretty much any operating system. It really is down to what you're able to do with it. So Ubuntu is a tremendous operating system for being able to
have their place. So like, you know, Manjaro I prefer because it's a bit more lightweight than Ubuntu, but Manjaro also isn't quite as stable as Ubuntu is. And then, you know, there's lots of different operating systems and they all have their specified purpose and they all target a different group of people. So to say that like one is inherently bad for everybody is kind of just wrong.
It's
because there's a place, everybody wants to use an operating system and everybody has their reasons for using it. So as long as you're informed, I don't think there is a sort of wrong choice. But anyway, enough of that.
Yeah, so if you want to get started with Ubuntu, James, shall we start the walkthrough part of this?
Yes, let's start with the Ubuntu website. If we go over to my screen. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good, good. So, you go to the website, there's information on here about the sort of projects that they do because they target enterprise stuff as well and IoT. So they do lots of interesting things outside of just the base user OS. And they talk about, you know, why would you want to use Ubuntu over other operating systems, not just, you know, other Linux distros, other operating systems in general. And they talk about their tools that make it easier to use Ubuntu compared to maybe other distros. But right now, big download tab at the top. And the first choice is LTS or the latest version. And you could probably go with the latest version and you'd almost certainly be just fine. But I just did the LTS version here just to make sure that nothing goes wrong because things love to go wrong when you're recording.
What's the difference between the two?
So this is more recent, but this is the long-term support version.
And that's has guaranteed support out to like how long?
That's a good question.
I think the reason they do that is also just because like anyone, like any business that's like considering adopting this stuff will want to know like when the end of life is going to be. And like being an open, you know, a project that's not run by a for-profit business, I believe, it's good for them to tell exactly when this is going to be supported until.
Yeah, so I think this is the version we were just looking at, 20041 is supported till April 2025. So
okay, cool.
That's security upgrades, maintenance, and stuff like that. So that's the idea there. So realistically, for this, we probably could have gone with that, but I just did this because it was the big green button, to be honest with you. Yes, so you download that, you get your ISO. This will try to automatically pick out your words.
Host operating system?
Yeah, your architecture is what I was trying to say. And so there's that. I'm assuming you can manually pick it elsewhere. I don't see it immediately here. They have their server distribution, their IoT distribution, cloud stuff. But then down here at the bottom, if you want a different desktop environment, they have all sorts of options. I don't actually know. Is the default XFCE? I feel like that's wrong.
I'm not sure. I was going to mention, though, that if you have a Raspberry Pi, the newer the Raspberry Pi 4, and you want to install Ubuntu on it, the 64-bit version is now actually supported on the Raspberry Pi, and it is super cool and really, really nice to use. So you can also go ahead and look for the Raspberry Pi installation version of this. You'll get a different disk image, burn it to an SD card, put it in, and then you're ready to go. So also a really cool option if you want to get started playing with Ubuntu 64-bit and also have a Raspberry Pi 4 lying around.
Yep. So you download the ISO, and if you were installing this bare metal, you would get out Rufus or Etcher, and it should be pretty simple to do because most people, not most people, but a lot of people installing an OS are going to be installing Ubuntu. So the defaults should probably be fine there, unless I'm completely wrong, but I would suspect things should just work in that regard. Here we're going to just do it in VirtualBox because capture card is being a pain and my laptop is still half broken. But anyhow, I figured out how to fix it, though. I've been told that I can apparently reflash it without pulling it apart because it's already core booted. So anyhow, I'm going to creatively name this one Ubuntu 1. So I hit the new button up here, give it a name, and you can see it's automatically detected that it is Linux Ubuntu, and it gets its special category because it's so popular, I guess, compared to other things which just fall under Debian.
Fancy. And so also a good sign.
Yeah. So if we hit next. So one thing that we should probably mention is that Ubuntu is a heavier OS in comparison to the other Linux distros that we've checked out, or most of them, I think, at least. It's not, I don't think it would be as heavy as like Windows or Mac OS, but I think it would be up there with them. Compared to sort of if you're running Manjaro, I think those are a bit lighter in terms of what comes pre-installed and what you're going to be running. So if you're thinking about specs, you may need to allocate a touch more than the other ones. Again, this is like me guessing because I haven't run side-by-side comparisons or anything like that. But Ubuntu has one reason that people have been turned off Ubuntu is that they added a lot of software pre-installed, which for the average user makes things easier, but for some people they're like bloat, nasty. So if you're running an older system, maybe something to consider.
Yeah, just resources, and like again, you're making the trade-off for convenience versus like security. So some people might object to having bloatware just because they don't necessarily want it, and it could have problems on it, and they want to control their software. And some people, might just be pissed because it's wasting resources on something that already might be like an older machine with not that much space or not that many resources in general to waste.
Yeah. So I just chucked 8 gigs of RAM at it. It doesn't need that much, but I have enough RAM to do that on the system, so I'll go ahead and do that just to make things a little bit smoother. And we're going to create a virtual hard disk, not use an existing one or not use a hard disk. And I'm going to go with the default disk file type, the VirtualBox disk image. And we are going to dynamically allocate, which means it's going to fill the space on your hard drive as you use the space inside of the VM rather than just allocating it all at the start, which means it's going to be a bit faster, but it's going to be we're dynamically allocating, so we're going to be a bit slower compared to if we allocated it all at the start. But in terms of the space saving, that's a compromise that I usually justify.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing we forgot to mention is the problems that can come along with using VirtualBox. So if you're using VirtualBox for virtualization, it's free, but it can be a pain sometimes. You may need to make sure your virtualization is enabled in your BIOS, and you may need to enable virtualization platform for Windows or whatever it is, a setting that gets automatically enabled if you install WSL, which can cause issues on some operating systems. I'm not sure about Ubuntu.
Yeah, so there's also other solutions out there for virtualization. I don't know if we're going to switch to my screen, but I've also spun up Ubuntu in Parallels, and the process was totally different. I basically just selected the ISO, it identified it properly, and then just went through the installation process, and now I'm just updating it to make sure that it's updated because I have some time to kill. So super, super easy, but this product is not free for students, so I don't actually recommend it officially on the show. I'm just pointing out that there's other alternatives if you're having a lot of problems with VirtualBox, which I sometimes do. Now, that being said, VirtualBox still is free and it's easier to learn than, paying a bunch of money for something that you might never use. So if you're just getting started with this, I recommend sucking it up and just going through VirtualBox's beautiful aesthetic menu and wonderful user experience to get a virtual machine up and running. It's really not that hard. As you saw, James set it up in just, a short period of time.
Well, we're not quite done, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so dynamically allocated. I don't actually know how much storage this uses by default. I'm just going to chuck too much at it. Linux is generally pretty small, but 64 gigs is more than enough for an initial install. Obviously, as you install packages, you're going to use more of that, but to start off with, that'll be fine. And I'm going to go into the System tab and the Processor tab and give it 4 cores, just so we don't lag while we're trying to set stuff up. And then the important part in the Storage tab, if we select the empty disk section, we can choose a disk file, navigate to wherever your ISO is, double click that, hit OK, and now we have inserted our disk into our virtual disk drive, if you will. And then we can hit the big start button. And it's going to still give you a drop down with like the one thing, so just hit start on it. So the other thing I'm going to do is switch this to scaled mode so that we can blow things up. Look at that. Nice.
Useful. That's great. I can see everything.
Perfect. So if you were actually going to use this, you could install, after you get it up and running, you can install VirtualBox tools in this context, and then that would make sure everything, the resolution is correct. But so it's easier to see for the video. It's just blown up to a horrible aspect ratio, so it's going to look nasty, but at least you can see what's going on.
Yeah. Cool.
And it's playing me a little song. There we go. And we are immediately, just like that, similar to Manjaro, in a live OS. So you can try it, which is a live environment. So if you were booting off a USB stick and you just wanted to use Linux for something really quickly, that would be an option as well. But we're going to install it. So hit the big install button, I guess. Select your keyboard layout. I'm just on the US one.
I'm just saying, you're lying, but sure.
I'm not lying.
Okay,
I carried this. Okay. Hand carried this back from the.
Don't they? How do they even allow those there?
They don't. People get very upset with me. There's riots outside my house. So this comes to the first aspect in terms of what we're going to do to try and harden Ubuntu a bit. Which, if you were going to use this as a day-to-day, you may want this stuff. So it's something to consider. But the normal installation includes web browser, utilities, office software, games, and media players, which if you're trying to minimize your attack surface and be in a hardened system, you may not want that, and you may choose to just manually install it later. So we are going to say minimal installation, and to try to speed things up here, I'm going to tell it not to download updates while installing, which normally you would probably just want to do to get your system up to date, but
it takes a long time.
Yeah, so just to speed things up, we're not going to do that here. Also, the third-party stuff you can do if you want, which is basically it's not enabled by default because proprietary drivers that you may need, but
especially for Wi-Fi stuff, that's where I've gotten in trouble before, where I end up wanting to use a piece of hardware and then it's a third-party driver that is not installed because I didn't check that. So just keep in mind that if you're trying to do Wi-Fi driver stuff, then you might end up needing to have a third-party driver installed, and you, by not selecting that, will have to go through and install it yourself.
Okay. So then here we come to the next important thing. So there would be more options here if you were setting up on a system that already had stuff in it, but because we're in a virtual environment, it looks like an empty disk. So we get these two options, which is basically manually partitioning and erasing the disk. But What we're going to do is go into Advanced Features, select Use LVM with the new Ubuntu installation, and we are going to encrypt our disk because of security.
Yeah, because we're hardening our Ubuntu installation.
Exactly, and it's going to ask us for a password in a minute here, so if I hit the Install Now button, normally you'd want to preferably choose a strong password here, so that would either be a long phrase or a random string of characters that you convince yourself to memorize. But for this, I'm going to choose the very, very good password of Ubuntu, which it will tell me is weak. And then this was an interesting option. So if you wanted more security, you could overwrite empty disk space, which I guess is so that they can't identify which sections of the hard drive are encrypted data. I don't know if this would actually work on an SSD because of the way SSDs work. I don't know if it would have any effect because I think they just get trimmed and it's all wiped. But in terms of a magnetic disk, I think this would actually add security in a physical system. I won't do this here because it would take more time, and I think it may even use the maximum size of our
yes,
virtual disk.
Virtual, yeah.
That's just an assumption, but if it's overwriting the space, I think it might do that. So, but yeah, that was an interesting option there. I was impressed to see that. But we're just going to hit Install Now. And it's going to confirm the partitions, which is basically saying a swap partition and a ext4 partition, which is our main partition where all our stuff is going to go. So that's fine. Time zone. I'm currently in the UK, so London time zone, sure.
Got you pegged. Good.
My name is Jamez. No, what should my name be?
Windows 95.
There we go. And for the password again, I'm just going to do Ubuntu. Normally, you would definitely want a strong password here, and you would not want to log in automatically because those are both security risks that if you're trying to harden your system, again, either randomly generated password or a long phrase, which tend to be easier to remember.
Yeah, you don't want to. You definitely want to make sure you have a long password, and then you also want to make sure you update your system after that nasty sudo vulnerability that was found.
Yeah. You know, I actually have like 3 24-character randomly generated passwords with symbols committed to memory for various things.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the parameters you used to create them?
No.
Oh, okay. Maybe next time.
I see you. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing.
Any of them like words I might know? Any like pattern to it you want to disclose that you think is like clever?
No. It's you just type it enough and then you remember it. That's the idea. I can skip this. What would I be skipping? I don't even know. I probably won't skip it then.
Find even more software. Oh yeah, it is really nice that like VLC and like a bunch of other like really helpful programs are like ready to install just graphically by just clicking on it, which is very, very helpful if you just want to get set up for like, I don't know, just being able to process more files than just like text files immediately.
Yeah, one unique thing that you get here is like the Ubuntu store, which is on other distros, which is pretty nice, especially if you're coming from something like Windows or maybe even Mac. Then to just be able to go in and download apps like that it's significantly easier, because if you're coming from Windows for the first time, especially, getting your head around a package manager may be kind of hard to do, because in Windows you just go online and you press the big download button wherever it is. Whereas for most things here, you just apt-get install.
Yeah, this process is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of confusing stuff. It is able to auto detect most of the settings that many operating systems like force you to do manually. So for beginners, like I really appreciate how straightforward this is and how difficult it is to mess up.
Yeah, it didn't ask us anything about networking or whatever, and the partitioning was really simple there. So very easy to set up.
I like that it does a little slideshow for you too if you get bored during the installation.
Yeah, you can look at whatever animal that is.
It looks like a weasel. Maybe not.
I don't know what a weasel looks like.
Wow, okay, so
I'm
that's almost
resisting.
done. I installed this and it took the entire like first part of our of our setup to actually manage to get that working. Like it took me a very long time to get the installation handled, but we're hopefully almost done with it.
Yeah, because I told it not to update stuff.
Smart.
So I think that speeds it up a lot. And also this is off an SSD, so the install process should be relatively quick. Downloading packages. What? What are you doing?
Ah, it betrayed you.
This is why we don't use Ubuntu. I'm joking. I'm not throwing shade today.
Well,
Clunky OS.
okay, it says 6 seconds. I can wait 6 seconds. That's fine. But then once it downloads them, it still has to install them, right?
Scammed. Yeah.
Scammed.
No, they're not. They're not. It makes sense. The stuff it's downloading. It looks like so.
Well,
I'll allow it.
All right, all right. Well, while that's happening, let me see if I can make my screen a little bigger. Okay, so one thing I was going to show is once we get this installed, weaponizing your system is something we're going to talk about. James, I believe you've tried out a tool to see if you can install various Kali Linux tools on your Ubuntu system. I'm using Parallels. It's trying to do this weird like coherence mode where it's like you're in Ubuntu, but also you're in Mac OS. So excuse like the weirdness on my screen that's going on. But at this GitHub for Port Kali, this is just a Python program that is kind of a successor to Cthulhu, that basically allows you to add the repository for Kali Linux to your Debian distribution and just get started with Kali tools. This one I had never heard of, but I was looking for a more updated version of Cthulhu that let me just, get started with this. So I went ahead and installed it. When you run it, it gives you a sick banner, as you can see, by Deadpool 2000. And then you can add Kali repositories, which allows you to install tools by just pressing 1. I've already done that, but what I like is it gives you a backup, which is sources.list.back. So if you mess stuff up, you can go back to your backup and unfrick it up. So then you can also update your system if you don't know how to type apt update. And then you can remove all Kali repositories. So if this just starts really getting messed up, you can try to roll back some of the damage by removing the Kali repositories, probably neutering a lot of the tools that you installed, but maybe you can salvage your Ubuntu install if something goes really wrong. And then you can also install Kali tools. So if I press 5, then it gives me a list of popular Kali tools that you can install really, really quickly. So that's awesome and very useful. You can do Burp Suite, APKT tool, Aircrack NG, SQL Map, Wi-Fi, Wireshark. So if I want to get started with any of these, let's say I want to do, Wi-Fi old school. Let's try it. It's a Wi-Fi hacking program. I can press 16 and it will go ahead and install it for me. Now, of course, you can always go and just install things like the normal way. Because now that I've installed the Kali repository, it should be able to find things that are in the Kali repository just by doing apt install. But if you want to do it through this Python tool, it has a lot of the popular ones right there, so why not? So I'm going to go ahead and say that I can do add non-super users to be able to capture packets. It'll finish installing. And then I can go ahead and run whichever program I want that I've installed. And I've installed several just to make sure it works. So as an alternative to Cthulhu, this works just fine for getting your Ubuntu to have some various Kali packages. And James, how's your install going?
We are ready to restart and then boot in whenever you're ready to go.
All right, so I'll press Control C. Let me try Wireshark. Oh no, wait, I just did Wi-Fi. I forgot. Yeah, cool. It has to be run as root, but sudo Wi-Fi. Yeah, cool. It works. All right, so of course we would need to like add a wireless network adapter here, but I could get started hacking Wi-Fi using this old weird tool very, very quickly on Ubuntu using the process I just showed. Doesn't take a lot of time, and again, kind of an argument for how versatile Ubuntu is as a hacker OS if you want to try some of this stuff out. So back to James.
Right, so I haven't pressed anything since we were last here. So we just hit the big restart button. And in a second here, it's going to tell us to remove the install media. So if I go check, last time I did this automatically, but just to make sure. So if I go to storage, yeah, you can see the virtual disk drive is empty now. So it's ejected itself. So you just hit enter. And then we should boot into our new Ubuntu install.
Cool. And if we hadn't done this, then it would have just put us right back in our live environment.
Yeah, exactly. But here you can see it's asking us for our disk encryption password, which for us is just Ubuntu. Don't forget that, because if you do, I don't think there's any way you're getting your files back, or I would hope there isn't. Press Control-C to cancel all final system checks in progress. Okay. I don't know if it does this every time or if it's just a first time setup.
That is a good question. Although I imagine, for me, it took like a good long second for it to start up the first time. And then after that, subsequently, it was fine. Hey, Windows 95, that's us.
That is us. And our password is, once again, Ubuntu. And just like that, we are in, and it wants us to connect our accounts. I'm going to press skip. And you can set up live patch, which I guess is automatically applying security updates. So that would maybe be a sensible thing to set up. I'm not sure about how that works, but it sounds reasonable.
It sounds like it probably would have fixed that sudo issue if it was enabled. So yeah, if you care about security, probably enable that one.
Yeah, the one thing I am going to do is say no, don't send my system info. And communication services can stay off. And then it's going to show us a bunch of apps that we can install. How kind of them.
Yeah, and these are all things that if you're doing Python programming, you got PyCharm right there, VLC. It's great to have a couple of these things like ready to go. GIMP, of course, is right there, front and center.
Yeah, so we can just open the Ubuntu store if we wanted to. But for us, we are ready to do that. So that's it. We've installed Ubuntu. We're done, right? That's the whole thing.
Yeah, if we were lame.
Yeah, exactly.
How do I get into Club Penguin?
How do you what?
I'm sorry, go on.
What'd you say?
Nothing.
How do you get into Club Penguin?
Yeah.
I haven't heard that name.
Okay, go on. Go on.
I haven't heard that name in a long time. Okay, so the first thing that I think we should do, or that you could do, is run a little security audit. So what we're going to do, with like hardening a Linux system, you could go for ages trying to do this, which is why if you're like really concerned about something like this, you may want to consider either Parrot or Kali, or if you're really concerned about your security and privacy, Unix is a great option. They put in a lot of stuff that hardens the OS for you already. But it depends on your use case. We're not going to go super in detail to it because we could be here all day. But just to show what you would sort of do is I'm just going to get the link to this. So there's this open source tool called Linus, which is a open source security auditing tool for Linux, macOS, and Unix-based systems.
Actually made by the guy who made Linux. Pretty cool, huh?
Wow.
No, that's not true.
Not really.
I made that up.
No.
Sorry.
Different Linus.
All right.
But so what we're going to do here is I'm going to be weird about it, and I'm not going to download it off here. I'm sure you could if my screen wasn't so blown up. But yeah, we're just going to clone it with Git because that's the easiest way to do it, I think. So the first thing we need to do is install Git. So sudo apt get install Git with an I, and it will ask for your password. And we just confirm to say we want to install it. If you don't know what Git is, it's a version control system. So it allows you to manage code basically, but for our case, we're just going to use it to clone the repository, grab the code off the internet. And we're going to do that by just being on our desktop and saying git clone, and then you could copy the URL, but it's just that .git. The URL of the repository on GitHub, that is .git. And just like that, we now have our Linus folder on our desktop with the source code in it. Wonderful. So if we go in there, if we cd into the folder, we chmod +x Linus to make it executable, then we can run our security audit, which is pretty nice. So all we have to do then is /Linus, and it'll give us the various commands we can do. So the command that we are going to run is to just run a simple audit. We are going to Linus space audit system.
Cool.
And this will take a few seconds, but it'll basically run a bunch of checks and give you a bunch of suggestions about stuff you can do to comply with various security standards. So if you really wanted to make sure that your Ubuntu system is top-notch security, you could go ahead and run this. One of the things it's definitely going to tell me is to update, or maybe not because I didn't sudo it. You can sudo it, and I guess I can check more stuff that way.
You got a lot of red going on up there. It's also calling you.
Where?
Yeah. And if you scroll up, it's got some red for you. Yeah.
Warning.
Warning.
File permissions.
Yeah. Also, you got some. It's calling you weak.
Wow.
I know.
Am I going to take that? Probably. Okay. So at the bottom, you can see it skipped a bunch of things because I didn't run it as sudo. So you can do that if you like. It should be the same process, just with the sudo in front of it. But we're not going to go through all these, so not much to worry about. And it'll give you a little score, I guess, tell you how many tests it performed. And then it'll make a little log, this sort of stuff. So it'll tell you that's a summary there, basically. And then if you scroll up, now we're into this suggestion section. And at the top of this section, it would show you the warnings, which for some reason it says I have no warnings, which I thought I did.
I saw a warning.
Yeah, okay, so maybe it's lying, but
maybe you just
it
got
says
to
I have
sudo
no
it
warnings.
for it to tell the
Yeah,
truth.
I sudoed it last time and it gave me a few warnings. It was like, you need to update your software, do this thing. I was like, okay, but it's useful if you really want to secure your system more than just the basic sort of disk encryption level. But yeah, again, we're not going to go through this. You can go through it all day, but it tells you the individual issues, and then it links you to pages for each of them that I assume I didn't mean to press help there. Okay. If we copy this, and we chuck it into Firefox, what is this page? So a little summary about the problem, a description, and how to solve it. So that's pretty nice. So it tells you how to fix all your security issues that you may have.
Useful.
And yeah, so if you were concerned, you can go through that. But for us, probably just want to show off whatever the thing was called, Cthulhu. Cthulhu. So Cthulhu is, what do they describe it as? Cthulhu 3, because the original one is very dead. But Cthulhu 3 brings all programs available in Kali Linux to Debian and Ubuntu. So the original Cthulhu was made by Lionsec, I think in Python 2, and it has not been active for 2 to 4 years. So I think it's 2 years, but it's very dead basically. So this is a Cthulhu 3 is a port of that project created by a guy called Shell with a 3 and some dashes in there. But he has now archived this repository as well, and it's been inactive for a little over a year. So Kody, if your thing works, that's probably better advice. But just because I've messed with this, we'll probably go through this because it works.
Yeah, there's multiple options out there, and I also see a lot of people use like on an Android phone, they'll get like a Linux emulator terminal, and then they'll be able to run some Kali tools on their just like Android phone. So there are kind of just like a class of just like Python scripts out there that will just like allow you to access those repositories and download whatever tools will work on your Android phone. That's kind of the two primary use cases are running an operating system like Ubuntu that you want to add a bunch of like Kali Linux weapons to, and then also like running, you know, like Termux or something on your Android phone and wanting to install the stuff there. So I've seen use cases for both, and I've also seen tools that are specifically meant for an Android phone that do basically the same thing as this.
Yeah, so what I just typed out was the link to the, I don't know, you would even call it the remote Git repo link or whatever you want to call it. So if we git clone that, we will get the Cthulhu 3 source. And then what we can do is cd into the folder it just made for us. And if I read through the documentation really quickly, we just have to make the installer executable with chmod +x, and then sudo /install.sh. It's going to ask us for our very secure password. And it's going to install Python 3 apt. Oh, so it has successfully installed Cthulhu 3. We can run it with sudo Cthulhu 3, and this is going to let us install packages from Kali, just like that.
Hey, that's pretty nice actually.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to get running. So if we can, what we can do, press 0 to view categories. Which category would you like to download something from, Kody?
Almost always Wi-Fi stuff. Sniffing and spoofing, that sounds good too.
Sniffing and spoofing or wireless attacks? What's up to you?
12.
So, attack 12. Which package?
Man, there's so many good ones. How about Bully?
Bully. I haven't heard of that one.
It's a good one.
Try it. So 6, and this will install it from the Kali repository list of packages that come or you can install in Kali really easily, but maybe a bit more difficult to install on Ubuntu by default. You may have to actually go to the Git repo or whatever it is and download it yourself. So this process is a bit easier than doing that. I guess the other option is you just add the Kali repos to your Ubuntu manually. That's probably a possibility.
Yeah, and this again, it can still cause the same problems that we saw when we were talking about using Manjaro with the Black Arch repository. So just be aware that that is a thing that can happen as you continue to use the system.
Yep. So there's also an interesting option here that I missed. You can install all the packages in this category with 28. You can get help, but we're just going to go back and then back again and then exit. And is it just Bully? Do I just run Bully too?
Mm-hmm. It'll shout at you, but yep, there you go. So Bully is for attacking WPS6 Pixie. So it's like a pretty versatile tool for going after wireless routers that have this particular vulnerability, which is pretty awesome.
Fork that actually works.
Yeah. Bully's also been integrated into a bunch of other tools. So it's one of the tools available in AirGetIn, for example, as one of the just like Swiss Army knife things you can pull out against a Wi-Fi network.
Nice. Okay. But yeah, so that's how easy it is to install something on Ubuntu from the Kali repositories, just because they're based on Debian. So it's pretty transferable in terms of using what works on Kali should work on Ubuntu, and probably vice versa.
Yeah, same package manager even. So, provided you know how to update and install in Kali Linux or any other Debian-based system, then you should be fine here. And so that means if you're using Debian, if you're using ParrotOS, if you're using Kali, it's pretty much all the same when it comes to installing, removing, and otherwise modifying packages.
Yep.
So,
Well,
I mean, that's like, at this point, we've showed how to install it. We've showed 2 separate ways of being able to go through with the, I guess, weaponization. And then we've also showed how you can get a series of recommendations for hardening your system as much as you want to. Now, of course, not all of those are mandatory, and they're also not automatic. So you do need to go through and actually address those concerns from the security audit. But getting a list of things that are kind of a list of trade-offs, I guess you could make for security that will take a little time to fix is still really, really useful for those who want to use this as a daily driver and have it as locked down as is reasonable without making it annoying to use. And really, this is probably the least annoying operating system to use on a daily basis out of any that we've showed off, except for maybe Manjaro, I would say.
Yeah. Manjaro, in my opinion, is I prefer that because I prefer the I'm a little Arch fanboy, so it makes me feel at home. But all in all, yeah, for most people, especially if you haven't used Linux before, Ubuntu is a great place to start. It's probably the most supported, beginner-friendly Linux operating system that there is.
Yeah, and again, if you have a weak little baby computer like James that just can't support the full weight of an operating system like Ubuntu, then absolutely Manjaro is probably a better choice for you. But if you have a big, strong computer that's able to, handle the full weight of an operating system that's got features built in to make it more easy to use, then you'll probably have a better experience with this.
I could cry.
I'm so sorry, Jim.
Insulting my baby like that.
I'm sorry.
I know precious computer.
I know your Frankenstein is a glorious creation, and that it's got a lot of special powers.
Man.
All right,
child.
so
Describe my child like.
It's hurtful, I know, to hear the truth. So
Savage.
This is how many operating systems have we done now? Like 5, 6, something like that. Like we've really dug into a lot.
I just thought of another.
Really? Which one?
We could do Fedora if people want to see that.
Ah, that would be interesting. I actually haven't done much on Fedora.
I haven't done much on it. I only know about it because it's one of the pre-installed things on Cubes.
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, so if you guys want us to check out Fedora, if you have any ideas for other operating systems for us to check out, I've really enjoyed this series of just trying operating systems I might not normally ever encounter and seeing how easy they are to use, deciding whether or not I would ever want to use them, and seeing kind of what use case they're most suited for. None of these operating systems are bad, except for, well, there might be like one. None of these systems are bad. They have a specific use case, and they really are. So please don't make that guy mad again in the comments. By the way, if you are the guy that got mad at us because we said that Black Arch might not be as intuitive for beginners to learn or to install than like Ubuntu, I'm not sorry.
They'll come for you now, Kody.
Yeah, I know. I know. I really feel like I started something. But yeah, so if you have any ideas, please let us know. You can drop a comment on the YouTube channel. You can go to SecurityFWD, that's SecurityFWD, and leave a comment there, which we will try to answer either by doing a show about it or by answering it during our live Q&A. And also, you can check out hackingwithfriends.com if you want to see other episodes, sign up for our mailing list. And yeah, we also have our sometimes co-host Killian doing the threat update on the Verona's Brand channel. So if you want to check out Killian again, because he just did that crossover with us like last week, you can check that out on the Verona's Brand channel and see what big companies are up to dealing with threats that they get thrown at them every day, which is really cool and interesting. James, thank you for showing us another cool operating system. I'm sure if people want to follow you, they can find you on Twitter at JamsDev, right?
Yes, JamsDev, one word.
And of course,
don't use it much, but it's there.
And of course, you can also follow me on Twitter at Kody Kinsey, my full name. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for sticking with us, and yeah, bye.